Hey, morning guys, how are we doing? I'm going to start off by reading the scripture and then we'll crack on. So this is entitled, Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. And it says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath.'" I wonder what you're like at resting. I wonder what you're like at having a weekly Sabbath. I wonder how good you are at even resting when you're doing the things that bring you rest. So I watch TV like this. Like that all the time. Sometimes I'm playing Football Manager on my laptop whilst playing like a Marvel fighting game on my phone whilst watching Netflix. And I can do all those things relatively mindlessly. I've played Football Manager for like 20 years, so I just know I can just click it on. I don't really have to think. And I can play my game and keep my hands busy. And I can kind of take in what's happening on the TV. But Jade knows me well enough that if a subtitle or like a little text comes up, she has to say to me, "It said Berlin 1909, or something like that, just so I'm not like, what's going on here? Why are there Germans everywhere? And so I'm not very good at resting sometimes. I wonder if you do this. Are you guilty of multitasking? Sometimes I'll be sending an email whilst making dinner and also trying to listen to my kids' requests. And the reality is you can't do all those things. One of them is going to mess up, or maybe all of them. It's too much to focus on. I wonder if you're regularly overstimulated. And are you at your best self when you are? Are you most like Jesus when you're overstimulated? I think many of us are characterised by workaholism. That doesn't necessarily mean your job either. If you're retired or unemployed or still in school, it doesn't necessarily mean that. I think it just means we have this deep need to be productive. Who even are we if we're not being productive?
Yeah.
A serious question. When was the last time someone asked you how you were and you didn't include the words busy or tired in your answer? Yeah, I'm good, yeah. Busy? Yeah, not bad. I'm tired though. I honestly think it was lockdown for me. And even then I still found something to moan about. Still like, when are they going to ease the restrictions or something? But that was the last time I didn't feel busy. Still felt tired. I had 2 small kids, but I wasn't busy. We worship productivity, and many of us feel like we need to give a reason for resting. Lockdown was like forced that on us, didn't it? It's like, well, what can we do? Have to rest. Too much rest isn't good either, and we'll come on to that. But I wonder if that's why we talk about how busy we are. In a previous church, I remember seeing a family's holiday pictures, and I spoke to the family after. I spoke to the mum, and I was like, "Oh, it looked like you had an amazing time." And she said, "Yeah, it was really good. We needed it though. We did need it." It was like, I felt like I had to justify it. In my mind, I was like, "Oh, that's fine. That's great. That's great." In my mind, I was like, "You don't have to convince me. If you want to go on holiday, I'm not in charge. Go on holiday. Have a nice rest." We did need it though. She felt she had to say that. We justify our rest. We feel like we need to have a reason to rest rather than just recognising rest is essential. It's a commandment. The only reason we need to have a Sabbath is because God tells us to. There's also a flip side, and I think our relationship with rest can be unhealthy in a number of ways. Sometimes it's the opposite. And maybe that will be true for some people here today. I've also had a relationship with rest where I've rested way too much. I haven't been productive at all. And we'll touch on that a little bit. I think most of us probably struggle with the other issue, but I think there's also the flip side where we're doing very little to contribute to the kingdom. Rather than 6 productive days and 1 day of rest, I've probably had times in my life where I've had 1 productive day and 6 rest days. That's not good either. So where does this come from, this unhealthy view of rest? Why are we like this? I think every human failing comes down to the faulty belief somewhere along the line. Or to say it another way, wrongdoing comes from wrong thinking. We see it right in the beginning in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve didn't rebel just because they lacked discipline. That wasn't the only reason they did something wrong. It's because they believed a lie. Because they believed a lie. Satan convinced them that God wasn't really that good, and there was something better they could experience if only they let go of God. And we've been the same ever since. Any area of your life where you know you're living against what God would want you to do, it's because deep down you probably believe there's something better out there for you. So if every wrongdoing comes from wrong thinking, what are our faulty beliefs when it comes to rest? I believe there are two. Firstly, I can do it all anyway. Or secondly, God will do it all anyway. So either we don't rest enough, I can do it all anyway, or we rest too much, God will do it all anyway. So looking at that first one, this is usually common with people who don't rest enough. They believe they can do it all anyway, and if they don't do it, it won't get done. My mum used to say that in the house. Oh gosh, if I don't do it, it doesn't get done around here. I think I say it now. So we heap pressure on ourselves and we don't stop. This view takes ourselves way too seriously, and in the long run it sets us up for a fall. Ultimately, it's putting ourselves in the place of God. The biblical word for this is idolatry. An idol is anything you put above God, anything you end up worshipping. And you might think worship is a strong word, but basically whenever you give all your energy and time and money to something, that's essentially worship. If that's where your thought life always is, it's an idol. And the problem with idols is they're counterfeit gods. They're cheap counterfeits. They're not the real deal. And we get hurt when we put our trust in them. When we think we can do it all and we eventually realise we can't, it hurts even more than failing normally does. And it leaves us not only disappointed, but sometimes absolutely dejected. Arilee, the other day, my little girl, I've got a 3-year-old daughter, she came into our room and she picked up these glass scales, like weighing scales. She picked them up, I hadn't realised, and I looked round. She was like, Daddy! She's like really struggling with them. And I was like, what are you doing? And I grabbed them off her. She was like, Daddy, it's too heavy. And I was like, why have you picked them up? I never asked you to pick them up. Why are you carrying something I never wanted you to carry in the first place? And I think sometimes we're like that with God. Whenever we feel like we can do it all anyway, we end up holding and carrying on to things that firstly are too heavy for us. Secondly, they just wear us down. Thirdly, we're likely to drop them. And fourthly, God is like, never asked you to pick that up. Why are you taking on things that I never wanted you to carry in the first place? Now, I will touch on the second faulty view, and I think it's that God will do it all anyway. And I've been guilty of this. The older I've got in my Christian walk, I've been a Christian for about 15 years, I've realised that everything is held in tension. So either I feel like I can never be forgiven, and so like I'm like on my knees before God, or I feel like it's okay, God forgives me anyway. And I find it really hard to find that balance. And rest is the same for me. Either I feel like I've got to do it all and things, I've got to be really responsible for all of the things God's given me, and I've got to work at 100 miles an hour and get it all done and to glorify Him. Or I think, well, it doesn't really matter what I do, God's in charge and who cares. It's really hard to find that middle ground. So I am going to talk a bit about the other side. And that is that God will do it all anyway. That's not to be confused with God can do it all anyway. Of course He can, He's God. But He's relational by nature and He loves to do things with us. It's the story of the Bible from start to finish, His desire, incredibly, to collaborate with His creation. Which is remarkable when you think about it. When I cook, sometimes Arilee has asked, again, my 3-year-old, can she help me? And sometimes I'm like peeling potatoes or whatever. So the only thing she's ever helped me with, I peel the potatoes. I don't fill the saucepan with hot water. I just peel the potatoes and then I put them down. And she's like, Daddy, can I put it in now? And I'm like, yeah. And she just puts them in a saucepan. It's not really helping that much. But she is part of the roast dinner now. She's like, I've done this. Look what I've done. And it's a little bit like that with God. Now, God does use us. We can do mighty things for God. Some of our giving is more than just that. But really, God is doing all the heavy lifting. But it doesn't mean we just sit back and let Him do it all. He doesn't want that. In fact, Jesus says this: all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, you go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you to the very end of the age. So does God need to use us? No. All authority on heaven and earth has been given to him. But does he want to? Without a shadow of a doubt. Go and make disciples. Yeah. Teach them to obey. Baptize them. So why? If you can do it all, why not just do it all? Or like I said with my daughter, every good dad wants to spend time with his children, see his children grow, thrive, develop and be blessed. And God is the same. As a quick example, think of the wedding at Cana. If you're familiar with this story, Jesus is his first miracle. He's at this wedding and the couple run out of wine. Huge social stigma at the time. Weddings would have gone on for days. And so to run out of wine would have been excruciatingly shameful. And so Jesus, he doesn't turn empty jars into full jars of wine. He gets servants to put water in the jars and then turns that water into wine. Yeah. Which is quite weird when you're God. He didn't need to do that, did he? If he can turn water into wine, I'm pretty sure he can turn nothing into wine. Yeah. So why do that? So the servants at the party get to play a part in the blessing. They didn't just see the miracle, they got to play a part in it. When we rest too much, we miss out on the things God wants to do in us and through us. Practicing Sabbath rest is not just a good idea. But I wonder if any of you realised or remembered, it's in the Ten Commandments. Keep the Sabbath day. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. I think as believers we see most of the commandments as like morally binding. But for some reason sometimes we look at Sabbath as if it's not. So we've looked at the 40 beliefs behind why we don't rest properly. Either too little or too much. But why do we rest then? Why do we have Sabbath? I think there are 3 reasons. I think to delight in God, to delight in others, and to delight in creation. So the first, to delight in God. Ultimately, Sabbath is time set aside specifically to God, to honour him, be with him, and enjoy him. A little bit like Alan spoke about fasting the other week. Fasting isn't just a diet or just like some really pious thing where you could be like, I'm fasting. It's actually an opportunity to remember God. Every time you feel hungry, to remember God, to remember and be grateful. Sabbath is similar. Every time we rest, it's an opportunity to put God in charge, to honour him, to love him. It's also an opportunity to remind ourselves that our hearts are restless, as Augustine said, until they rest in God. So until you rest in God, you'll never find true rest. You'll never be satisfied. You'll race after everything, whether that is higher social status or more money or more popularity or more fame or whatever it is. You won't find rest until you rest in God. So it's that weekly reminder to still our minds, but not just our minds and our bodies, but our hearts and our ambitions. Sabbath is a reminder to delight in the God who gives you all you need. Secondly, to delight in others. We often call Sabbath rest like our family day. It's a day where we want to be intentional with each other, to listen to each other, care for each other, play together, cook together, whatever other crazy ideas come to mind. The rush of work, and I don't just mean your job, but I mean productivity, can push us to value the things that are not eternal. The rush of work can often push us to value the things that aren't eternal. We tend to prefer tasks over people. One of the biggest lessons I've had to learn is that tasks aren't made in the image of God, like people are. As a youth worker, sometimes I have to throw away my programme that I've prepared for that evening or that morning to deal with the people that are in front of me. And it took me a while to not get frustrated with that. And sometimes I still do. I'm like, I've got this great plan. Why aren't you listening? And then I'm like, no, forget the plan. Remember the people. Those who merit my attention, my ears, my time and my energy are those who have been crafted by God in his image. And Sabbath rest is a wonderful opportunity to invest in those who are around me, specifically my family and close friends on your Sabbath day. Finally, delighting in creation. Sabbath rest is a gift from God to enjoy his generosity in creation. And I don't just mean nature, I also mean human creativity. If you're like, sometimes I just want to watch Netflix and chill that day, I'm not saying no, you need to get out in the Lancashire rain. Like, you can chill at home, you can enjoy a film or things like that. It's just the opportunity to consider that God has made his creation beautiful in and out, just out of sheer generosity. Like, he's a creative God. Like, children are creative by nature, and it's like play to them. And so playing, being creative together, enjoying nature as well, sure, but enjoying creativity and creation. Sabbath rest permits us to take to take in the pleasure that God has integrated into creation. So, we've looked at our faulty views, hopefully picked them apart a little bit, or looked at why we think the things we do and why that's not good. We've looked at why we don't rest, why we should, and what Sabbath is for. But if you're like me, like, what does this actually look like in practice? And what practical steps are you guys and am I going to take to get spiritually fit in this area? How are you training to get better at Sabbath? Or how could you train? One of the things we've been chatting about, we've been doing the same series with the youth upstairs on a Sunday morning. And one of the things we've been saying is you don't get fitter or better at something by trying harder, you get better by training harder. So if I gave you a guitar right now and you'd never played it and you were struggling, and I went, try harder, it wouldn't have any impact. If I said train harder, in other words, like practice at it, you get better at it. And so with anything you ever hear in church, or anything you ever hear in life that you want to put into practice, is about starting small. It's not about picking up the guitar and expecting to be incredible. It's about recognising we all start somewhere. So if where you're starting at the moment is you're horrendous at rest, don't feel judgment. Feel the opportunity to get better, and get better slowly. That's okay. You walk before you can run. We all do it. There are areas in my life where I'm still miles off where I want to be. So start small. It's all about practice. So how do we get better at resting the right amount? Now, I'm aware there's a certain irony in telling you to train harder at resting. But there's a good chance you might not find this easy. If you're not used to stopping, don't be surprised if on your Sabbath, if you decide this week I'm going to have a Sabbath, and by the way, that can be any day. Mine is on a Saturday, because Sunday's often like work related. Yours might be on a Friday. Yours could be any day. You might work shifts, so it's not even a regular day of the week. Choose one and be intentional about it. But you might find on that day just feelings of anxiety or upset arise. That doesn't mean you're doing Sabbath wrong. It's just you're finally giving your emotions a chance to catch up with your body. Yeah. You might find this hard, otherwise you'd be doing it already. When we hold faulty beliefs, those faulty beliefs produce unhealthy habits. And unhealthy habits can get deeply ingrained. So instead, we've got to replace that faulty thinking with good thinking and replace those unhealthy habits with healthy ones. So there are, I think, I've read up on this the last few weeks, month or so, and I've found kind of 10 habits that I think are really healthy for Sabbath. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. Some of these you won't want to do, and that's fine. It's more a theme, and it's more supposed to give you a flavour of what Sabbath is about, as opposed to being a tick list. We're not going to get pharisaical about it. My first challenge before I come on to these 10 is pick that day of Sabbath. And a suggestion is do nothing related to your job on that day. But let me get on to the 10 practices for Sabbath. Some of these might seem strange, some of these I've never done, but this is kind of a historical overview of what often maybe Jewish people would do on the Sabbath, what the church has done over the years. So 10 best practices for Sabbath. The lighting of candles and prayers of blessing is the first. I've never done this, but I guess it's that intentionality around spending time focused on God, thanking him. Secondly, feasting. Big part of Sabbath. Don't do keto on Sabbath. Don't go gluten-free unless you're a celiac on Sabbath. Like, enjoy Sabbath. There's a big part of it is feasting. Reading of scripture. Singing. Interesting one, number 5, lovemaking. In the Talmud, in the section of marriage, there's actually a command to make love every single Sabbath night. So if you're married here, Sabbath just got a bit more interesting. Sweetheart, it's Sabbath. Number 6 is walking. So getting out, doing some exercise, enjoying your body. Number 7 is napping. A nap is a great way to place your trust in God with all your body. Think of Jesus napping in the storm. Really surrender to God when you take a nap. Number 8, time with family and close friends. Number 9, time alone in the quiet. And number 10, gratitude. It's not a to-do list. There's no right and wrong way, necessarily. There are wrong things you can do, as we've discussed, but you don't have to do all those things in order to have had a good Sabbath. But hopefully this gives you a bit of a flavour, at least for the heart of Sabbath. Notice there's no emails in there. There's no redecorating your house. Unless both of you in your family find that super relaxing. I reckon one of you does and the other one's like, no. Same with gardening, same with cooking. There might be some of those things that you're like, actually, I find that really restful. That is part of me enjoying creation. If your other half doesn't find that, don't bully them into your Sabbath. So just to recap. Delight in God, delight in others, delight in creation. Don't fall into the trap of thinking you can do it all anyway or God will do it all anyway. God loves to partner with us. God doesn't want us carrying things that are too heavy for us. God wants us to rest for a day a week, to spend time with him, to love him and to delight in him.